Hello and welcome to the first episode of Banned Book Conversations, where radical readers discuss prohibited prose. I'm your host, Tonya Todd. Before we get started, I want to give my thanks to everyone who offered book suggestions for the series and give a special shout out to JP Butler for his production assistance and to Mike Burton of Genuine Chit Chat for his awesome graphics, platform sharing, and continued support. Success would be much more difficult without you both, so I thank you. With that, let's get started. We are here to talk about banned books. Banned books are literary works that have been removed from a library shelf or school curriculum. Over the course of Banned Books Week, this series will cover 7 different books, the reasons they were banned, and the value in reading them. Today's book is Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism, and You by Jason Reynolds and Ibram Kendi, which is a remix version of Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning. What we're doing isn't so much a book review, but a conversation about Stamped as a banned book. But before we get to that, let's meet today's radical readers. Let's start with Lisa. Please tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Hi, I'm Lisa Rayne. I am a romance writer who writes historical romance, as well as contemporary romance. A former lawyer of a few decades, I now teach high school English and high school African American studies. So some of the topics in this book are topics that I have to deal with from a curriculum standpoint. So I'm really excited to be here. So thank you, Tonya, for the invitation.
Glad to have you. Next up, we have Allison.
Hi, I'm Allison Schlotton. I'm a writer of comics and essays and screenplays, and I'm also a parent. And I read Stamped from the Beginning originally, and then I read a remix with my teenager, and I feel very passionately about this book and its importance, and I think everyone should read it.
How about you, Dave? Tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Hey, well, first off, it's great. I really appreciate being invited and meeting everyone here. It's fantastic. So probably most people know me as a podcaster by day. I do actually work in IT, but I'm very passionate about banning books, or rather not banning books, just because you don't like the content. So I was really keen when I found out you had this project going, so I was keen to join in and add my voice however I could.
Well, that was my next question. What prompted you to participate in these conversations? Do you have anything to add to that, Dave?
Well, I think the actual book was one that you'd suggested, and I thought, well, I wouldn't be the obvious candidate to join in this discussion, but the whole series of banned books that I think in my mind, you have your own sphere of existence, don't you? And things that happened like 10, 20 years before that might as well have happened in Roman times when you're a kid. And it's only as I've gotten older, I'm just thinking, man, some of these things that, I thought were ancient history were in very, very recent times. You're talking about burning books and stuff in the 50s and 60s and what have you. And in my own lifetime, I thought, well, I'd never see that. And so the thing that really prompted me about starting to discuss banned books was the whole thing about mouse. And I think it was in Tennessee where they banned it there. And I was like, it shouldn't be banned. It should be required reading for everyone. What is the saying? Something about those who don't learn their history are destined to repeat it.
Yes.
When I was at school, I wasn't really that interested in history, and that part of that was to do with the history that we're taught. It's very interesting and important stuff like the Magna Carta, how in Britain we farmed and all that stuff. It's important, but there's so much that just isn't actually touched on at all. So as I've gotten older as well, I've gotten very much more interested in actual history, and trying to get various data points and actually make my own mind up. Because again, whereas when you're younger, you think history is an absolute thing, and then you realize, oh no, wait, everyone was spinning it in whichever way they wanted to. So again, this book has been a fascinating eye-opener for me, but very much in line with kind of where I am in life as well, I feel.
How about you, Lisa? What prompted you to participate in the conversations?
Well, as I mentioned, I teach high school language arts and high school African American studies. And when I was in high school in the olden days, that Dave talked about, like, you think that was so long ago. For me, it's kind of long ago. We didn't read this stuff when I was in high school. Like, I very rarely got to see a book in my language class that was written by someone other than a white person, and mostly white males. So I make it a point that I'm pulling literature from lots of different cultures and cross-section and perspectives, because my students need to see those perspectives. And the only reason we have African American studies is because I lobbied to get a course that had been on the books at this high school for almost a decade without being taught. And I'm like, I keep waiting for my kids to take this course. When are you going to take this course? And find the principals like, well, are you willing to teach it? And I'm like, well, if that's what it takes, yeah. And as Dave was mentioning, when you're a kid, you think these things are outside your perspective because they're not talked about in high school. You have this little box. And I think these conversations are important for high school level, college level on up, because the issues we're having with race and racism in this country is because we haven't delved enough into other people's perspectives. And one of the best places and the easiest places to get that is reading books written by other people.
There you are. How about you, Allison? What prompted you to participate in the banned book conversations?
I'm a huge reader. I love reading. And when you said you were doing this, I gave you some ideas for books, because when I hear books banned, I immediately want to read it if I haven't already, because I know there's an important perspective included in that book that people would like to silence. And I think that people who are interested in banning books are interested in banning compassion. And I think we could all use more compassion. And I am encouraging my kids, and they're involved in book clubs that read books like this. And if it's not in their curriculum, and I was fortunate enough, when I was in English class, when I was a high school senior, my teacher was a Black woman, and we did own voices as a category, which was, she introduced me to, Zora Neale Hurston and Toni Morrison and Louise Erdrich. And these were people I had not read up to that point, and it changed my life. And people shouldn't have to wait till they're 18 or in college to realize that whatever perspective they've grown up with is the only one that's valid to listen to.
Right.
And I think people who are interested in banning books are generally from the dominant culture and would like to believe that there's one way of seeing the world and it's theirs. And I strongly disagree with that perspective. So I'm happy to talk about banned books and books all day long.
So with that in mind, have you ever been offended by a book?
Me?
Yes.
Offended. I mean, there are books that I haven't finished because they're not for me, because I might find them triggering because of trauma that I've experienced, and I don't feel like it's approaching that trauma with the respect that I think it deserves. And so I will not finish a book, but I don't think it should be I shouldn't be available to other people. That's a decision for them to make. So I haven't been offended to the point that I think this book shouldn't exist, like.
Just offended in general. I'm just asking if you've been offended in general.
I wouldn't say offended. That's not a word I would use. I would just say it wasn't what I felt was what I wanted to read in this moment in my life.
Okay.
And, I make that decision. I'm a person who can make decisions. We can all make our own decisions.
Yes. How about you, Dave?
Not by a book, and not anything that I would say, okay, I'm so offended by this thing, it should be banned, it shouldn't be seen by anyone. But actually, in this last week, Spider Dan, who you know quite well, he suggested a movie for us to cover on the VHS Strikes Back, and it's probably the most offensive movie I have ever witnessed, and my co-host Chris had witnessed as well. So if anything was going to be jettisoned off into the sun, it would probably be that movie. But again, it had an interesting story. The director tried to make the most offensive thing as this kind of rebellion against the censors. So he was trying to do that, and I think he achieved it. But even something like that, it shouldn't be banned just because it doesn't fit with someone's agenda.
Do you want to share the title or do you not want to give it the boost?
I don't know if I want to in polite company, but I'll just say the title. It is called Necromantic. It's a zero-budget German exploitation movie, and it is awful. And I do not recommend you watch it. I recommend you listen to the podcast, so VHS Strikes Back, and we discuss it enough. But we actually do say on that, don't watch it. It's it's horrendous.
How about you, Lisa? Have you ever been offended by a book?
You know, I've been thinking as Dave and Allison were talking, like offended. I will say there are times where I've come to a book or a place in a book that has probably upset me or made me angry. And when I'm thinking about that, these are books written by someone from the majority culture, but they're writing about Black people or a Black experience. And it becomes such a caricature, such a stereotype that it's hard for me to stomach. And particularly when they're talking about inner city life or single parenthood, there's this box they put people in. As someone who grew up in the inner city raised by a single mom, because my parents were divorced, I look at that and I'm like, okay, where did you get all of your research or experience? By watching 50s television? Because there's a lot of that out there. And it's just, and another thing, and this is even lighter reading. I mentioned I write romance. I have read romance books written by white women who have Black or Latina main characters, and they describe them as brown skin, and they're talking about this beautiful, all through the book. And then we get to a love scene, and they mention body parts that are pink. And I go, and then I'm like, I'm out of the book for like 10 minutes because I'm like, this brown woman does not have pink in this particular part of her anatomy. And I'm like, you know, and I'm like, oh my God. And so those things bother me. They bother me. I don't know if I'd say offended, but I know that there's a part of me that gets really upset or angered or frustrated sometimes. Like, why'd you even go here if you can't write this experience, right? And I will say that has happened to me probably more than most people because I read voraciously, right? So, you know, it's just bound to happen.
So is there ever a valid reason to ban a book? We'll start with you, Lisa.
You know, I actually make my students write a thought piece, a quick write on this for the beginning of Banned Book Week, because I do a series on Banned Book Week. And so far, we have not come up with a good reason. And I'm also a parent, you know, so my teenagers have been through high school. And one of the things that often gets discussed is there are students who think, oh, yeah, those books really shouldn't be in high school. And I say, yeah, they should. They should be in high school. If your parents don't want you reading them, then you should not read them. But your parents don't get to decide what my kids get to read. And they're also in this high school. That's between me and my kids. And so, was it Allison who said, you know, like when something's banned, it makes me want to go read it more. So I'm one of those people who have a tendency to make sure my kids know when there's a discussion about a banned book, because high schoolers in that rebellion stage go, oh, it's banned. Ooh, I better go check that out, right? So I cannot actually think of a good reason to ban a book. I think it's very much, this is what I like or don't like, and I'm going to make sure other people don't get to read it because I don't want people to read it. And that's not appropriate.
How about you, Allison? Are there valid reasons to ban books?
No, I mean, Lisa put it really brilliantly. So I totally agree. And I also, just on the parental side, I am continually astonished by parents who don't want their kids to read certain books. Like, there's TikTok, y'all. I mean, I don't really understand that thought. Like, if your kid wants to read a book, have them read the book. that is going to be such a more thorough and fascinating exploration of whatever topic is being discussed in an 8-second video. And they are being exposed to all sorts of topics on TikTok. You know, it's not just like 5-minute hacks, you know, there's a lot going on there. So I think if your kids are interested in reading, why would you ever stand in their way? And then grownups, like, whatever, that's just ridiculous. I can't even believe that anyone thinks that grownups should have books banned. I get, like, it's just, and Kendi himself says, you know, book banning is the new book burning. Like, you are not burning books anymore. We're just making them impossible to find. And it is, it's just people infringing upon our freedom. And I don't think there's ever a good reason for that.
And Dave?
You know, I was thinking real hard about this earlier today, and I couldn't think of an example, but the only kind of concept I came up with was to think if there was a book that incited violence or hatred explicitly. And it's funny, Alison mentions about TikTok and Facebook and Twitter. I mean, I genuinely limit my time on those social media platforms now because I just find it triggering, because you are a few clicks away from absolute hatred and vitriol that's spewed out on a very consistent basis. Any given day I log on, I'm a few clicks away from seeing some of that crap. But that generally doesn't make it into books. There's a whole filtration process that has to be, you know, you have to sell your idea, you have to have the concept, you have to have the dedication to go through and write this whole thing, then you have to promote it, and all these hurdles that people have to get through to get it to be in a book probably filters out all of that stuff that I was talking about there. So certainly on the list that's been talked about, I've not come across a book where I've thought, oh yeah, I can kind of see their point there. So for those, no valid reasons are on the table for me. But just like say, if someone was, you know, inciting a capital riot or something like that, then yeah, then they should be thrown the riot act.
For example, huh?
Just
On
a
that
random
note,
hypothetical example.
And on that note, when you publish, I mean, self-publishing is a separate, like these books, like Stamped, for example, is fact-checked. And, you know, it is put through a rigorous process that videos on TikTok are not. And I think that's an important thing to note. Like, this book is true.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to start with you, Lisa, on this next one, because you're our teacher. In general, what can be learned from reading a book with content that people find offensive?
Perspective. I mentioned that early on. Understanding people comes from understanding their lived experience and their perspective, and recognizing that somewhere out there, someone may have had a different experience than you. And reading books written by own voices, meaning people who've lived that experience, who have that experience, or have taken the time to take something important to them and go get factual historical information and synthesize it for you, allows you to get a perspective that when you meet other people out in the world, you can understand that people can be different, but underneath the difference, in one aspect, we're pretty much really all the same. We want the same things. We want to live free. We want our children to be happy and more prosperous than us. We want a great society. We want all those things, but our lived experiences are different because of who we are or what body we were born in. And if you don't understand those people, then the flip side of that is fear. And fear is where we end up sliding into hatred, racism, judgment. And I'd like to think that books help us eliminate some of that fear by giving us perspective and understanding.
How about you, Dave?
Yeah, there's just not enough time in your lifetime, is there, to read enough and learn enough. And I do feel like, you know, before books like this came around, you could read all the literature out there and you wouldn't come across some of the facts that are in here, because rather than it being something that's offensive, I think the reason people are kind of, getting out their pitchforks and whatever, saying to ban this thing, is a lot of it is just the inconvenient truth. That's actually what it is. And it doesn't fit with the narrative that people want to us all to adhere to. So I think this book in particular has been a fascinating read. It taught me a lot of things. I'm actually originally from Liverpool, which has got a quite dark past in America's history. If you know that, it's quite a prominent port with the slave trade, and so this book actually sent me off down a rabbit hole of learning more about that, and kind of trying to learn things about what actually happened, as opposed to just what is skimmed over, if at all, in history. And you see occasional bits in documentaries. But I mean, to Alyson's point, the fact that it's all fact checked as well, you're not just looking at some TikToker's opinion about how the world is. It's just, this, you can learn a lot from reading one book, but reading that one book promotes a whole bunch of other questions and wants you to go and read other books as well.
Yeah. Alyson.
Well, generally books that people find offensive, like The Stack Behind You, I find fascinating. So I guess for me, I would read a book that people find offensive, mostly because I think there must be something in there that I need to know that is really getting some people riled up. And is it getting that? Because it's probably calling their way of life into question, and it's making them deeply uncomfortable. And I think oftentimes that's what truth does. And so
Yes,
I
indeed.
guess I figure there's some truth in there that I want to know more about.
Well, now we are going to get into our book.
Woo!
According to Marshall Libraries, according to their website, which they are not banning the books, they are just reporting on them, Stamped Racism, Antiracism in You was banned and challenged in America because of the author's public statements and because of claims that the book contains selective storytelling incidents and does not encompass racism against all people. In a statement to School Library Journal, Ibram Kendi stated that the heartbeat of racism is denial, and the history in Stamped will not be denied, nor will young people's access to this book be canceled. Alyson, you mentioned earlier that you gave me several suggestions for books when I broached you about joining these conversations, and you suggested this one. I had seen it, but with the multiple versions, I was confused about which was which. I hadn't put the effort in to learn more, and I am so grateful to you that you prompted me to change that. So I'd like you to be the first to share your history with this book. You did a little bit, you touched on it a little bit, but please share your history with this book, how you learned about it, and what drew you to read it for the first time.
Well, thank you for all of that, Tonya. That was really generous. You're always so generous. I read Stamped from the beginning. I think it won the National Book Award, and that was what prompted me to read it. Also, a friend was reading it, and she was like, I know you'll love this. You got to read it. So I did, and it's like a textbook. It's dense. Like it has got, and it needs to be, because Kendi is really putting forth a new way of thinking. Yeah, right? He's putting forth a whole new way of looking at racism. Like, all the pieces have been there, but he is saying, like, here's how it went. Here's the history of this. And so that book needs to exist, because you need to have all the sources and everything, because people are going to question what he's wanting to say. And then when this remix came out, it was my son was involved in a social justice book club, and they read it for that. I would have read it anyway, just because I was like, yay, a more digestible version of this book that maybe then I can like take out into the world and talk about more readily, because I am not Kendi. I can't do this. So I read it with him and I loved it, but I reread it just now, and the book is just like, I love Jason Reynolds as well. I mean, I said to you, like, I love Kendi, but I mean, Jason Reynolds, like, I'll read anything he writes. He is, I mean, he's a genius. And I don't use that word lightly. He truly is. And his whole mission about getting kids to read and making reading accessible and providing representation, like, I'm 100% behind what he's doing. And he, I think, is a force of change. And I think he makes people deeply uncomfortable because he makes reading cool and interesting and available to everyone. And people who are coming from a white supremacist or colonial perspective, they do not want that to be the case. They want people to believe reading is not for me. Knowledge is not for me. Access is not for me. I can't change anything. I'm stuck where I am. And I think these two men make such a compelling case that learning our history is important to move forward, and it's important for all of us. And that makes people really uncomfortable, people in power. And he makes it sexy. He makes racism sexy or fun or whatever word you want to use. You're laughing when you're reading about Jefferson and his hypocrisy, you know, like, you're laughing about this guy who, up till not that long ago, we were just talking about this because my other son read a book about Lincoln where they're talking about how he might have been gay, which is kind of this new conversation that's happening. And talking about Jefferson in a real way, that didn't happen until not that long ago. And people are like, but he's a hero. He's our founding father. Okay, sure. But also, he was a slave owner and he wanted his cake and eat it too, you know? So I think that it's just so, I mean, I can go on and on about this book. It's maybe one of my favorite books there is, because there's so much there. And they both are just also incredibly inspiring people. And I think that is part of the reason this book is banned too, because they are kind of these icons of what you can accomplish when you believe that your story is worth telling. And people don't like that.
You said something very important in all of that. The key word is learning about our history. You didn't call it Black history, you called it our history. And thank you for understanding that. This is all of us. It affects all of us. We are all involved. And it is not some separate segment of history that some people don't need to know. So I just appreciate you for framing it that way. And I could tell by the way that you said it, it's just how you feel. It was not a statement you were trying to make. So thank you for that. Dave, how did you first hear about this book and what prompted you to read it?
Heard it from you when I said, "Oh, I'm interested in doing something, you know, for this Banned Books Week," and I think you gave me a few different options, and again, I was a little bit confused. I went to the heavy version first, and I was like, "Oh, wait, there's this nice accessible version. I like this one."
I like this one.
So yeah, I can't say I sought it out myself. It was purely through you guys, and I'm so glad though. I was actually thinking as Allison was talking there, I want to say that I love this book, but it is kind of a bit uncomfortable to say that as well, because there's a lot of shit in it, isn't there? There's a lot of bad stuff in there. But I think it's like this dual feeling of, oh my God, this is horrendous, and wow, this is brilliant. The way it's made so accessible and relatable. I think that's the key thing. You know, again, I'm glad it's written for kids, because I could kind of understand it, and, you know, making the kind of pop culture references and what have you, you know, it just brings it up to date. And you know, he keeps restating that it's not a history book, even though it is a history book. So, but the fact that he makes it so relatable is the thing that doesn't make it like a dry textbook that, you know, you have to learn on this date, this thing happened. So yeah, I came to it late, but again, I've been through it a couple of times. I will go through it again. There's just so much in there, and it's done in this kind of light-hearted way. But it deserves, and because it is a quick-ish read, you know, it deserves to be gone back to and read again multiple times. So yeah, this I have to say, this is one of my favorite kind of non-fiction books that I've read.
How about you, Lisa?
Well, I'm gonna say I did the heavy version first.
Good for you.
But again, right, you know, lawyer, certified social studies teacher, And for me, it's part of that, the National Book Award. You know, I discovered it after the National Book Award because I tend to follow those books to find great books. And I love the density of the original. And I get what he says about it not really being a history book, because he gives us history, but what he does beautifully is he correlates each section and gives you headings and chapters and shows the intersectionality of scientific thought of the period, philosophical thought of the period, what was going on in religion. And what I think he does beautifully is show us how all those aspects of our lives actually intersect to support a racist society, right? How things were happening in history, the economic rationale was for slavery, because let's face it, the economics came first, the racism came later to justify it. And I know that from studying it in college, but I didn't find out till college. And I know that from teaching it, right? And to find a book that makes accessible to the world, that it wasn't that Blacks and Africans were inferior and therefore we're going to take advantage. No, we had this economic reason to use them for free labor. And then we had to justify it. So we went to science, and we went to religion, and we went to philosophy, and we went, oh, look, we're doing them a favor, right? And he does it so beautifully. I just think it's accessible. And then the smaller version, the one with Reynolds, I got because I thought, probably like, I was like, I love this, but how do I talk about this to other people? And I'm already trying to make things like kids learning, well, Lincoln wasn't actually an abolitionist. And no, right? The Emancipation Proclamation actually wasn't intended to free any slave. It's like, how do you teach that? And we have teachers go, what? That's not what they told me in elementary. And make them understand, but still enjoy the lesson. And what I think that book does beautifully is break it down into smaller chunks that allows people to engage in it in a way that may be a little less threatening for people, because there's a little bit layer of humor. But I don't think in any way you slice it, like Dave says, for some people, there's just uncomfortable stuff in here, and you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. You really do. So Lisa, I want to ask you first, after reading it, and we're going with the smaller version of it, which parts do you think triggered people to challenge and ban it?
There's a lot, but one of the things I go to is the talk about religion, and discussion about how religion supported these racist ideas. When we start talking about religion in a negative way, people go, whoa, 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 wait. No, like we're talking about the church, or we're talking about a denomination, we're talking about like Christianity. No, what you can't. This is sacred stuff. And with religion being a touchy subject, for a lot of people to learn for the first time that there was religion used to justify this, I think that's hard for people. And people start going, whoa, 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 wait, there's some sacrilege going on here. We can't have that kind of talk in America. No, no, no. And it makes people want to hide because it's uncomfortable.
How about you, Allison? What do you think were the triggers?
I was like trying really quickly to find him exactly saying it, but for me, I read it, and essentially the book is about this, but that if you look at the disparity in equality and opportunity and incarceration and all of these different data points between, just for the sake of this conversation, white and Black populations in the United States, you either have to believe that there's a system of racism causing these statistics to be, or you have to believe that Black people are inferior to white people. And so the whole book is refuting this idea that many of us were raised with, that this is an inherent thing. This is the system that our country was built on. And it's saying that's a lie. There is no superiority here. Everyone is equal. This is an anti-racist book. We're all we all should be afforded all the same opportunities, and we have not. And that is why the disparities exist. And I think that basic premise, which is privilege, well, that's one word for it. White people don't like it. I think some non-white people don't like it. And I think any book that proves that privilege is a non-debatable issue, people are going to want to get rid of. Because then pretty quickly, I think we're going to get into a conversation about reparations, which a lot of people don't want to have that conversation because, like, I think it's Reynolds, or no, actually it was Damon Young just recently, who's a Black writer. He was recently saying people are really happy, white people are really happy to cash in on the work and labor of enslaved people. But then when we start talking about the debt that is owed, everyone goes silent. And I think that anything that is beginning a conversation about reparations is a non-starter for most people in power.
How about you, Dave?
Wow, some great points there. Why would they want to ban it? Again, I come back to this thing of the inconvenient truth. I think with racism and a lot of things I hear the right talking about these days, they kind of want anything that happened before our lifetime to just be shelved and put away in a box. And it's like, okay, that's just for the history books that you nerds want to read. It's all about the here and now. So we know about the slave trade, guys, just get over it. It's fine. We're all here now. Let's all live on as Americans and what have you. And it's just incredibly inconvenient to say, well, actually, the reason things are the way they are today, you can plot a course from all these different historical events, these macro events, as well as things that happen on the smaller level, on the more localized scales in different parts of the country and what have you. I think it's just all incredibly inconvenient, and it's better, you know, from the white majority to just say, look, let's just forget about it. It's you know, speaking as someone who is white, right? I grew up in a fairly poor background, so I've come along on that journey. The place where I'm from, sort of near Liverpool, it's predominantly white, and I kind of grew up through the 80s, through the 90s, and you don't realize that you're being constantly fed this idea of racism through, you know, what you're taught at school, through what you see in the media, and you're brainwashed, you're calibrated, you're indoctrinated into this way of thinking. So it is when you have been, you know, Clockwork Orange style, indoctrinated into thinking this way, and then you have to make yourself a little bit uncomfortable to go, well, this doesn't make sense. So I'm going to scratch away at that and try and learn a bit more. And then you find out, and then you can see you can see how we got to where we got to. To Lisa's point, I think the religion thing is definitely going to wind people up straight off the bat, or certain people straight off the bat. But the fact that based on the color of your skin, you do have that privilege by default. The system is rigged in, you know, someone like mine's favor. And to actually accept that, I think is incredibly uncomfortable for certain people. Again, I think certain personality types are the ones who lead themselves towards, oh, let's ban the book completely. Let's stop people learning that stuff. But I think, again, it's nonsense. And I'm glad that it isn't actually banned. It's, you know, it's put forward to be banned, isn't it? But again, I think the fact that the smaller version is so accessible, I feel like we are on this trend to get into a better place. It kind of makes me feel positive about where we're going, even though, you know, when I scroll through Twitter and whatever, I'm constantly told that's not the case. We seem to be going backwards in so many ways. And I think the other thing that opened my eyes, you know, a little bit more than what they were before. I hadn't really stepped back to consider how unique America is in the whole world. I mean, I'd grown up again through those 80s and 90s. I worshipped everything about America, you know, all the movies and stuff. I wanted to go there, wanted to, you know, it was something to aspire to. But the way it was built, and again, this book made me go back and think about that, how it was all built, how the economics of it were all driven, is incredibly uncomfortable. And there's nowhere else on the planet that is that same kind of experiment, if you like.
Mm.
I just want to add, because Allison brought up like systemic racism, basically institutional racism and things like that, and even recently, I think it's interesting. There's that recent story about the California family who had beachfront property basically taken from their family in the early 1900s, the 1920s, right? And they claimed eminent domain because they're going to build something on it, only to have the state and the city keep the property. And recently it was returned to the family and it's worth something like $20 million. Well, this isn't the only Black family that this happened to, where land was taken from them and given to somebody else who now has generational wealth, but the Black don't, because everything we used to build generational wealth was either taken from us under the guise of some type of state law, political law, or destroyed, like Black Wall Street being burned down. But that also wasn't the only place that was burned down. So when we call these things out, as Allison was saying, like mentioning that, I agree with her that they make them uncomfortable. And today's point, that's part of the privilege, right? It's like it was stacked against you because they would take from the Blacks and give it to some white family. And as more books like this come out, I think there are going to be more and more people in more and more cities and states that go, okay, wait a minute, we really shouldn't have had this in the first place. We got to give it back. And it's going to be interesting to see how much more of that may come about.
So Dave's right. It is a positive force moving forward. Like it's nudging. It's not a rocket, but little by little change is happening. Dave, I want to go back to something you were saying earlier. I want to hear about your reader reaction, and you have definitely touched on it. You said it made you go through a few rabbit holes. It made you uncomfortable. It made you think about who you are and where you come from and how it's been involved. But tell us a little bit more. What did you learn? What did you discover in the rabbit hole? And what were the things that made you uncomfortable?
I think the things that made me in particular uncomfortable is how I viewed Tarzan and Rocky. And it made me think, oh my God, can I not like Rocky now? and I kind of went around a little bit of a mental gymnastics circuit. And then I thought, no, actually, I can still love Rocky, but I can also understand and appreciate how, you know, it was engineered, if you like, again, to give us that kind of white savior movie and the whole franchise and what have you. I think the things that I found fascinating as well, it was mentioned about Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln, and how they weren't these shining beacons of equality as they're portrayed to be. And actually, you know, more than anything, I'm speaking as a Brit here. And I often, a lot of my American colleagues and friends, they'll always ask me when July 4th comes around, oh, you guys must hate this. And I'm like, no, not really. You know, it's such a long time ago. It's like not really a thing in Britain. But
Really?
so
I seem to
I've
remember
always
getting a happy treason day from someone.
Yeah, that is a good that's a good meme that started a couple of years ago. I do see that one as well. But but I'd always celebrated it, and you know, I kind of, you know, to my American friends, I'd say Happy July 4th. July 4th this year happened after I read this book for the first time, and I didn't do that this year. It made me so angry, to be honest. And I'm not going to swear, but I was just like, the forefathers who...
No censorship here, so if you need to swear, go
honestly,
for it.
and you guys can chastise me, but honestly, I was thinking, fuck the forefathers. Fuck them and everything they fucking stood for. Because this idea that this country was built on freedom and everything. Okay, if you're a white bloke, that's true. For everyone else, it's not true. If you're a woman, it's not true. If you're of color, it's not true. And it made me really, really fucking angry about it. So
If
when
you
July
already
4th,
lived here, it's not true.
yeah, and again, I kind of speak with that privilege and with that perception, you know, the whole media, everything I'd kind of been fed through my life pretty much, you know, is geared towards people like me. And again, I think back to when I was a kid and I used to worship everything about America and what it stood for. And I just feel like it's a lie. The whole thing is a lie. And again, it's that I was a bit more emotional, if you like, after the first time of reading it. And I think since then, and having read it a second time, it's fine. It's just where we are right now. But you have to embrace it as well. You can't just stick your head in the sand and ignore it, because things don't get better then. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I went on a real roller coaster with this, and like I say, I went looking at things that the part that Liverpool had to play. You've got a lot of streets that are still named after ex-slave traders and things there, and so it's a bit of a battle going on here as well. They're trying to change some of those things, and again, I think some of that the local council there are paying a bit of lip service to it. They're saying like, yeah, it's the same old stuff, you know, we can't change history, and you know, or yes, we should accept the fact that these were horrible people and we shouldn't be naming streets after them. What else did I do? I watched Malcolm X that I hadn't watched, you know, and that's a good old 3-hour movie, isn't it? So I just consumed as much as I could, but probably the most overpowering emotion was just being really angry and emotional about the whole kind of how America was created and the lie, or some of the lies that are peddled around it, and yeah, just where that's led to, and getting more angry about the fact that people want to bury this stuff. You know, the fact that it is the inconvenient truth, and that makes it worse. That just perpetuates everything, rather than meeting it head on and saying, okay, look, this is where we are. This is what happened. So yeah, does that answer your question?
You definitely answered my question, and you also gave us the answers to why you, as a white man, as a Brit, belong as part of this conversation. It's going to take all of us to fix this. And excluding people who might be benefiting from it, that's not the answer. We all need to work together to create the change that will benefit all of us.
100%.
So Lisa, what was your reader reaction the first time you read it? Well, or you could tell us all of them.
I was so excited for this book, just because he gives so many historical references. And one of the things people often do, whether you're talking about racist idea or homophobic ideas or a misogynistic idea, well, that's not true. That didn't happen. That's not true. And when you go there, you go to this book and goes, but do you? Right? And it's actually the way I teach my African American Studies course. I give primary source documents first. Then we talk about what they learned in the textbook, right? But we're going to talk about the primary source documents first, because you can't say it didn't happen. And
that's the lawyer and the teacher in you.
Yeah, I can't help it, right? And so when Dave started talking about, F our founding fathers, right? And I'm like, because we get to the Constitution, I teach it really, really different than all the white history teachers they've had before, because I have to point out that the Constitution covers propertied white men. Blacks were excluded, women were excluded, and I have a mixed race class, and after we go through those initial founding fathers, we talk about all this and we get to the constitutional amendments. And I point out to the class, what does it say about how our founding fathers felt about women? Now that you know everything you know about the history of enslavement, that Black men were given the right to vote 50 years before they gave it to white women. Everybody gets silent. And I say, women in the class, especially white women in the class, you need to think about that, because there's a lot of misogyny in our founding documents, as well as racism. And there's an intersectionality there. We all know that then if you're a Black woman, hello, right? Hello, Black woman, right? There's a whole bunch of layers to this. And I love teaching our founding documents, but what I love is getting children, even adults actually, to understand. There's a whole lot you were taught about this document that leaves out what really, really, really became the foundation of our country. And I've recommended, it's now become standard reading for history teachers in our building, a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me, Everything Your American History Book Got Wrong by James Loewen. I love this book because this talks about all the stuff left out of history textbooks. And so then I get stand from the beginning, I'm like, oh, you know, more primary source documents, more facts, more detail. So for me, it's like, ooh, you know, I'm like, I got another tool in my toolbox now as I try to make change. And I work for equity and inclusion, and I teach, right, American history from a Black intersectionality perspective. Talk about fuel for, I love this book. I just love this book. If you can't tell, I love this book.
And Allison, I guess you didn't have any reader reactions or any love for this book.
Yeah, I'm sorry with Lisa. I love this book. I was, when they first announced it, when like Jason Reynolds and Kendi announced it, I was like, this is amazing. I was so excited, and I was actually scheduled to see them read on March 13th, 2020. And that was canceled because of COVID. But I was like, this is just the most inspired collaboration. And I love how they both talk about each other in events and in the book. And yeah, I'm with Lisa. I love this book. And I want to say something about what Dave said. He's below me. That's why I'm pointing down on my grid. That made me think of Caste by Isabel Wilkerson, that you might enjoy. Or find illuminating. You probably won't enjoy it. But she talks, and I thought this was so, I mean, she talks about so many things, but she talks about how Hitler studied Jim Crow as a way of developing all of the laws around Jews, because he was like, how does America do this thing where they're seen as a bright light of freedom when they're actually, you know, got their foot on Black people's necks? You know, how do they do that? I want to try to emulate that. And I thought that was so insightful, and people knew it was a lie. Hitler knew it was a lie. So anyway, you might find that book useful. But yeah, this is a great book to recommend to people, and I'm always grateful. Like, Caste is an amazing book, but it's not an easy read. You're not going to like, oh, okay. This book, if anyone can read it. And I'm so grateful to have a book that I can say, like, read this. This is a good place to start, you know, because I do have a fair amount of conversations about race. And so it's useful for me to just have something, and then we can talk about it. And I think it's useful for a lot of people who don't want to, and I'm speaking about BIPOC people, who don't want to be everybody's educator. You know, like, it's not your job to teach white people how racism works. And I think I have encountered these same white people, even with me, who are like, oh, but this book is hard, but like, I don't know where to start, but like, I don't want to hear it. Like, you can read this book. I get that you don't like reading, or I get that it's tough, but like, you can read this book. And I think it's such a gift to have something that is undeniably readable. So if they don't want to read this book, we probably don't have a lot to talk about.
It really does offer the information in bite-sized, digestible pieces. Like, there's just no excuse to not be able to handle this book.
Agreed.
So you brought up something important about talking about racist ideas, and I'm going to have you go first. Why do you think it's important to study the history of racist ideas?
Is it me?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. I think it's important because it shapes the world we live in. And I think that I loved what Dave said. Like, it really is mostly white people. They really want you to get over it. They really want you to just move on. And and I like that he talks about the whole colorblind thing, that we get that far in history in this book, because I remember that very well when Obama was elected, like, oh, we're over it, it's post-racial.
Yeah.
I remember that phrase getting thrown around a lot, and I felt as a white person like, shit, am I racist? I don't feel like it's post-racial. Like, what are they talking about? Like, there's no such post-racial. What is we're like generations from that. And this book or I talks about, like, we've been doing, Resmaa Menakem talks about it in My Grandmother's Hands, like, we've been doing this for a long time. We got to be doing something new for a long time before we could even start to talk in those terms. And I think people just, like, you need to have, it's helpful. I would like it if everyone had it, some awareness about what the water is we're swimming in, what the air is we're breathing. And this is the air that we're breathing. Racist, colonial, white supremacist, those are good umbrella terms for what it is, because it's all the things: transphobic, homophobic, ableist, racist, and it's telling us that really, like, a couple bodies are good. And really, everyone else needs to try to be something they're not. And it hurts us all, like you said, Tonya. If we heal this, it heals us all. It isn't pie. We don't get less if someone gets more.
Right.
We all get more. This is a better world. If everyone has enough food to eat, that is a good thing. If everyone has health insurance, that is a good thing. These are things that we should want for our fellow humans, and we don't do it because we think we'll have less, and all of that is very white supremacist. And the more that we examine these ideas and we start to deconstruct them, the better world we're going to have for all of us. So I think the more that we can begin to realize that these things that are initially very painful to admit, actually, the more that we can deconstruct them in ourselves, the better life each of us is going to have. Yes, it hurts at first, but it's going to hurt no matter what. So why don't we make it hurt because we're healing it, and not hurt because we're further inflicting pain on ourselves and others?
Well said. How about you, Dave? Why is it important to study the history of racism?
I think I mentioned earlier that, it's important to understand the history, to understand where you are right now. And, we're just fleeting, aren't we? We'll have our little lifetimes, and then, people will come way after us, hopefully, if we don't screw up the planet so much. But yeah, we need to understand that history to just give us the context. And one of the things I really hate is just ignorance and ignorant people. I particularly hate it when I feel like I have been ignorant. And, I think for me, it's over a period of years now where I've gone from thinking there is this racist and not racist binary kind of choice. And going from that's how I was thinking, that's how I was wired, and starting to understand, oh no, wait, there is a difference, and some of the things that the book touches on. I mean, I remember the whole Rodney King in LA thing, and the riots from that. And again, I didn't think in my lifetime I would see another thing like the whole George Floyd thing, and it's just so shocking to me. But then why should I be shocked? Again, when you go and learn more about some of the statistics that this book covers, and you think, well, there is this whole institutional rigging of the system. Let's fucking change it. So let's not do that. Let's start discussing this stuff. Let's start to understand why the world is fucked up the way it's fucked up. And let's start to change it. And the slightly depressing thing, this will take such a long time to navigate out of, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't start right now, like today. So discussing it is I feel like the first part of the journey. And it's been a long part. I know people have been discussing this way before, my lifetime and what have you, but it still feels very early on in terms of that healing process. So yeah, I'm all for pushing it out there. Let's discuss it. I'm not deluded. I don't think we'll flip a switch and everything will be solved tomorrow. But it certainly won't be solved by silencing stuff like this.
And it's time to start. What better place than here? What better time than now?
Very good.
Lisa, why is it important to study the history of racism?
Dave mentioned at the beginning that well-known saying, right? Those who don't understand their history are doomed to repeat it. And I see that happening right now in the United States as we began to dismantle rights built off of laws under the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. Those laws were necessary to right racist systems and racist unities and societies for controlling the other, right? Controlling women, controlling Blacks, controlling miscegenation, the interracial marriage of people, even though we have that lovely Supreme Court justice who left out our case of Loving v. Virginia, but that's what it was about, right? And there seems to be this sense that we're writing something. Well, what we're writing is getting back to a system of America that was comfortable being extremely racist and extremely misogynistic. And people don't recognize that that's what we're going back to because they don't know the history of the country with racism. We're not correcting something unless you're a white supremacist. And if we're correcting it, what we're correcting it back to is the history of America's racism. But you have to know the histories of America's racism to recognize that. And if more people understood it, I think there'd be even more outrage than there already is as these rights are slowly being dismantled. And that's something we all need to know and understand and look at from Dave, he broke down the perspective of our Constitution, that great document, that great male white supremacist document, right? But you got to know that. And until we know that, America's system, right, of democracy is in danger. It's highly in danger. And I find that unfortunate.
And so, Lisa, why do you recommend stamped Racism, Anti-Racism in You? What do you hope people will gain from reading it?
By understanding where we've come from, that they understand what we truly need to do to protect the ideal of the America we say we have. If that's really the America we want, you need to read this and understand the history of racism in America so that we don't go back there.
Dave.
I'm not sure I can improve on that. I just think, again, we'll be, so doomed to repeat it. And it is, although I so want to be optimistic about the future, the last few years in particular have been quite jarring. And I think there is almost this separation. I do think, I like to think that I'm in the majority of people who are becoming more and more enlightened and learning more about the history and challenging the status quo. But then I see things constantly which are counter to that and just trying to double down on getting back to this, original constitution. The whole thing with, I know this isn't about guns, but that is one of the things that winds me up more than anything about the whole constitution and what have you. But I think, no, I'm still going to remain optimistic, although my optimism takes a battering on a pretty much daily basis at the moment. So hopefully this is just the darkest before the dawn, and we can kind of come out of that and start getting on the right track again. Learning and improving. It's not a linear trend, is it? So it's a bit wobbly in the middle.
And Allison, why do you recommend it? What do you hope people will gain from reading it?
I agree. Lisa said it all. I also want to say, like, I was going to try to find the Angela Davis quote, like, that you have to have radical hope every day. That's not what it is, but like, you know, you have to, you know it, Lisa, probably. Do you know the quote I'm talking about? Okay. Sorry, I just saw your mouth moving, so I was like, she knows it. But I, you know, like, I hope too that it, like, for many people, that it begins that journey of reading and educating themselves and realizing that, yeah, these past years have been really tough. And at the end of Caste, she literally, like, foresees this all happening. Like, the way that we are headed is here. It's very clear, like Lisa said, like, we're repeating history here. And this is obviously so much of what's happening as a reaction to Obama being president, and people becoming terrified at the specter of one bit of there being equity somewhere, someplace, you know. And so we need to tamp it down. And I think if you can read this book as a white person, since I'm a white person, I'll say, if you can, like, let go of the idea of white exceptionalism, I think that's a really empowering thing. It's hard, maybe at first, because you had a hard life. Maybe things happened to you, they were terrible. No one's trying to take that away from you, white person. No one's trying to say what you went through was not difficult, but you are not exceptional. You did not earn these privileges that you have. You were born with them. What do you do now?
And I think the quote you were looking for is, you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world. Is it that one?
Yes, and I totally butchered it, so thank you.
Thank you, teacher.
Possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time. And I think that's the part Dave was saying is kind of hard. You try, but there are times you get society and what's going on whips you, but you gotta believe.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, you guys are all amazing today. Thank you so much. I would very much like to thank my guests for their thoughtful input and discussion. Allison, tell us where the people can find you and support your work.
My website, Allison Shelton, ALYSONSHELTON.com. There's lots of wonderful things on there, including, which is apropos to this discussion, some resources that a group of us developed. If you, particularly as a white body, would like to start working on deconstructing the white body supremacy that you carry in yourself. And it hopes that other people would start groups like this and start these conversations, but also my writings and things. And you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at by Alyson Shelton. And thank you, Tonya, for organizing this conversation and for caring about banned books. I am very grateful to be a part of it.
I also care about comic books. Tell everyone about Reburn real fast.
Because I also wrote and created a comic book, Reburn, which Tonya is a big fan of and such a wonderful supporter of. And you can find details of that on my website as well. And you can still order it. You can contact me and I can send you some. We're very proud of it. Thank you, Tonya.
It's an amazing comic book. It's like you read it and you're like, this is the way it's supposed to be done. You know, like this does not look like someone's first effort. It's brilliant. And, you know, it's not just because I like you that I know that. Making sure everyone knows that. But I want you to know, thank you for nudging me to read this book. I feel like I'm a better person for knowing you. So none of this is about me just loving comic books or, you know, it's just, I genuinely feel like I'm a better person for knowing you because you are continually putting information into my life that makes me do better and be better. So I appreciate that. And no pressure, Dave. Tell the good people where to find you and how to support your work.
Again, I can't follow that up really, but I mean, nothing particularly is educationally impressive. But you can get me on Comics in Motion. I appear on various shows there. You can also get me on the VHS Strikes Back. So very keen podcaster and discuss all things pop culture.
And you also do your best to support others and share your platform, which I appreciate. And it's one more reason I'm glad to have you here.
No, it's brilliant, and it's brilliant for me. It's a completely transactional thing, you know. So having all of those people on there, it gives me joy, you know, to give people the opportunity to bounce ideas as well. When people have got like a little germ of an idea, and then you can see that develop into something. And no, it's been fantastic. So, and again, I just want to thank you. It sounds like it was Allison who recommended this book and to yourself, and then you've recommended it to me. So again, thanks to you both.
And
Thanks
we're
to
already
Lisa
doing
as
it.
well.
We're already
This,
working the magic of just word of mouth, and the ripples are extending all the way to the UK. So thank you for starting that trend, Allison.
and what I would say as well, because I don't want to finish on just a plug, but I do want to say, you know, so I've got 3 kids, and I think they are so much more enlightened. You know, that generation of kids, the Zoomers, I think you call them now, don't you? So much more enlightened than you know I was, and you know people I knew at school and what have you. So change will take a long time, but I think having these kinds of conversations, and I told my kids about this book and been discussing it with them and stuff. So that's where the change will happen. I'm positive about it.
And last but not least, our superstar panelist, lawyer, teacher, writer, Lisa. Tell everyone how they can find you and support your work.
They can find me at my website, which is lisarayne.com. I'm on social media sparingly, but you can find me on Instagram and Twitter, and now TikTok. I finally dove in, Lord have mercy, at author Rayne. That's where you can find out about my books. I do intend moving forward to do a blog that has more historical tidbits in a column. I'm designing on my website called History Up 365. So look forward to that in the future. And got my Highlander book coming out this December. So yay.
Wonderful. And make sure everyone knows how to spell your last name for the people who are just listening and not watching.
That's Rayne, Rayne.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for participating in this. Thank you for those of you watching and listening. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and comment. And then we also want to just thank you for reading, because if we're not reading, we're not putting the information into ourselves that we can share and spread with the world. So thank you for that.